I never thought a Monday morning would start with a flatbed in my driveway and a stranger trying to steal my truck. But then I never met Delilah Winterbourne either. There she was, clipboard like a scepter, smiling as if she'd already sentenced me, and the tow truck guy was halfway through hooking chains to the frame of a truck I'd spent 3 years bringing back to life. If you want dramatic, here's a woman who ran our little cul-de-sac, like it was a nation trying to seize my cherry red 1972 highboy. Let me back up a second. My name is Marcus Hoffman. I'm 52, been doing HVAC design and the small pleasures of a steady paycheck for a couple decades. The kind of work that makes you proud in quiet, weird ways. 2 years ago, I bought a farmhouse that shouldn't have been for sale, white paint, flaking blue shutters, a little crooked, a wraparound porch that made me feel like I'd stepped into another century. 10 acres old maple trees, the kind of place that hums with a history you can almost hear at dusk. A while after I moved in, I found that highboy at an estate sale sitting in a barn like it was waiting for the right idiot. No rust engine seized interior shot, but the bones were honest. I spent evenings and weekends bringing it back, new engine, rebuilt suspension, a fresh interior with period-correct materials, and I found the original cherry red shade and had the body painted to match. When that V8 finally rumbled, it felt like a small resurrection. I parked it in the driveway and felt stupidly proud. 6 weeks of notices came first. A slip on the windshield, a typed letter, a polite couple of threats about fines. They called it a commercial vehicle under the community standards. I ignored them because that's what you do when paperwork doesn't apply to you. My deed predates the subdivision. The farmhouse was there before the developer parceled everything out. I kept the deed and the survey in the glove box, like talismans, careful, boring, the kind of preparation that sounds paranoid until you need it. Then, the morning the tow truck came, I was already recording on my phone before I hit the porch. The driver was in his fluorescent vest, focused on securing chains. He produced a work order, and then Delilah swept in wearing beige slacks and a navy blazer, all pleased with herself. "This is official HOA business," she announced like she was delivering a verdict. I asked politely to see the authorization. She handed me a paper that smelled of fresh typing, emergency amendment to enforce aesthetic standards, dated this morning, 3 paragraphs of self-importance saying my truck was unacceptable and she had the authority to remove it. "Where's the board vote?" "Where's the notice?" I asked. HOAS. Don't get to invent law on the spot votes, minutes, mailed notices, that's the ritual. She declared emergency powers, said she could act to maintain property values. The tow driver hovered uncomfortable like a man stuck in the middle of someone else's performance. I asked where the emergency was. A pickup in a driveway is not a fire, it's not a flood. And then I said the thing that made a sound like a dropped pin. My property is not part of your HOA. The silence that followed was beautiful. Delilah's face lost color in a way that made me almost pity her for the theatricality of it. I explained farmhouse first, development later. Previous owner refused to join the association in 1995 and asked if she wanted to see the deed. I did something very petty and very practical and pulled the deed from the glove box. Watching the smug little paper in her hand go from talisman to worthless scrap was oddly satisfying. The tow driver called his supervisor. "I can't complete this tow," he told Delilah, looking at his radio like it might beam him to a different life. "There's a legal issue." She tried to double down. "You signed the HOA agreement when you bought this house, not mine," I said. "That's the thing about deeds. They either bind you or they don't. Mine didn't." I called the non-emergency police line because I wanted to report documentation that someone had attempted an illegal seizure. While I waited, I sat at my kitchen table and organized everything: deed, survey, title, registration. The officer who came later was a young guy with a calm voice. He took notes, filed a report, and told me bluntly that this looked like harassment. He suggested I might want to talk to a lawyer. That sounded expensive and unnecessarily dramatic, so I filed the suggestion mentally and moved on to the lever that actually solved things: the management company. The towing company called their main office and sounded embarrassed. I emailed the deed and survey to the regional manager while the tow guy finished unhooking the chains. The regional director called back, sweating through his words, apologies, admission that the HOA president had been operating under a misunderstanding, and the magic phrase, "We've notified our insurance carrier." Once you involve insurance and management, suddenly the petty officialdom is less impressive. Here's where the second act, the counterattack, really clicks. I took the truck to a classic truck specialist for a proper inspection, a 3-hour hands-on photo-heavy forensic review of frame suspension, steering, everything. The shop billed me $800 for the thorough inspection, and the mechanic wrote a careful report. Yes, chains had been attached to structural points. Yes, no damage miraculously shown. Yes, photographs proving an inspection was necessary because of the unauthorized towing attempt. I sent the report photos and receipts to the regional director. He called back within the hour and started talking about how to make this right. The management company cut a check for the inspection and my time. The board called an emergency meeting. Not everyone on the board loved the idea of Delilah playing sheriff without jurisdiction. A neighbor, decent, reasonable, a guy who lived 5 houses down, who'd always been polite at block parties, called to apologize on behalf of the board. They had stripped her of the presidency, censured her for exceeding authority, and voted unanimously to make sure it never happened again. And then the twist: the previous owner, the old man who'd warned me about the HOA when I bought the place, stopped by with a thermos and a crooked smile. He'd been defending that land since the subdivision went up, and he told me something that made the whole thing land differently. Delilah had a pattern of overreaching. The board had been tolerating the theatrics because they feared the drama of confronting their own. Seeing him nod at the deed and the flagpole I later raised felt like a small passing of the torch. After the dust settled, life resumed with a sweeter ordinary. 2 weeks later, Delilah marched down the street to complain that I was running the engine while washing the truck on a Saturday morning. She yelled about noise ordinances like a general issuing tickets. It was 10:30 a.m., perfectly legal. I reminded her calmly that county law outranked HOA suggestions and that, again, my property wasn't under her jurisdiction. She turned on her heel and went home red in the face. I got a check. The board censured her, the management company apologized, and I got to keep the truck, the flagpole, and my mornings. The farmhouse's value didn't fall. If anything, it went up. Realtors knocked to ask if I'd ever sell. I told them no. I like being the guy with the cherry red highboy and the 30-foot flagpole that catches the morning light, where Delilah used to look out her window and fume. But here's the quiet part. I want you to sit with the moral that isn't preachy but simply true authority without accountability is insecurity in a suit. Delilah wasn't powerful because she had a clipboard. She was anxious that she could make people do what she wanted. The previous owner had spent decades standing up to that kind of bullying and taught me the most useful lesson. Boundaries matter. Paperwork matters. People like him and docs like a deed don't feel dramatic, but they work. So yes, I taught her a lesson about property rights and personal boundaries. I didn't burn anything down. I didn't stage some grand revenge. I filed, proved documented, and let systems do what systems are for. The V8 still rumbles at 8 in the morning. When the weather's right, the flag still snaps in a wind that seems to love irony, and Delilah avoids eye contact when she sees me across the street. That's the satisfying part, not the spectacle, but the small, stubborn return to normal. What would you have done if someone tried to tow your pride and joy from your own property? Would you have moved the truck to keep the peace? Or would you have dug in, like I did? Drop your thoughts. Tell me about a time you pushed back against a ridiculous rule and either won or learned something hard. I want to know where you land. When is standing up for your right stubbornness, and when is it simply protecting what's yours?